Welcome, everyone. Welcome. It's nice to have you all here today. It's a nice crowd, and I appreciate you all coming out. We have a very interesting speaker today. I think that you'll find your time well spent. So, Bob, would you introduce our guest speaker, please?
It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. K Diffenbaugh. Dr. Diffenbaugh has been the MPUSD superintendent since 2014, and he brings a wealth of interesting experience to the district. PK began his career in education as a fifth grade teacher in Oakland, California. From there, he went to Mexico to teach in a public middle school and to study Spanish. This was followed by time in Sacramento, where he spent 6 years and turned around a low-performing high school into an award-winning high school. After graduate school, he became the director of 7 to 12 instruction for the Garden Grove Unified School District, which is in Southern California. Interestingly, PK was a member of the first of the Doctorate in Educational Leadership program at Harvard, which was an innovative partnership between the Harvard Business School, the Kennedy School of Government, and the Graduate School of Education there. He is exceptionally well qualified to address today's subject: do charter schools provide real choice? MPUSD contains both dependent charters and charters approved by outside entities like Monterey County Office of Education. Please welcome Dr. K Diffenbaugh.
You took the first page of my speech, so thanks for the introduction. So thanks for the opportunity to speak today about charter schools. Now more than ever, I feel our country needs an engaged citizenry, and I'm thankful for the League of Women Voters for your leadership in that regard. Charter schools are a timely topic. This last session of the legislature brought many different bills forward that will have an impact on both current and future charter schools in the state of California. So I started my career, as was mentioned, as a fifth grade teacher in a charter school in Oakland, California, Dolores Huerta Learning Academy. I then served as a teacher and principal at a large charter high school in Sacramento Charter High School. After going to grad school, I served for a year as Garden Grove's director of 712 instruction, and now in my sixth year as superintendent here. And so I feel like these experiences allow me to bring a unique perspective to the conversation, having served both in the charter world and in the traditional school models. And I say conversation because my intent today is not to try to convince you of anything, but to raise some questions that I hope will lead to deeper dialogue around charters and the future of public education in the state and the country. I know, I've been warned that this crowd has a reputation for being engaged, and so I will try to leave plenty of time for questions. So first, let's just begin with a common definition. Charter schools are public schools that get funding from the state, and they have greater flexibility in hiring, curriculum, management, and other aspects of their operations. Unlike traditional public schools, they run by school districts. They do not operate under the guidance and direction of an elected school board, but they have and don't have a board-appointed superintendent. So most charter schools are run by organizations that have their own self-appointed governing boards. And charters are authorized by local districts, the county offices of education, or the State Department, the State Board. So despite this single definition, charter schools have evolved in a way which I feel there's a real danger in grouping all charter schools together. The reality is that the term charter school now covers a broad spectrum of educational institutions. So for example, there are online charter schools, there are for-profit charter schools, there's charter schools that are focused on incarcerated youth or homeless youth or teenage mothers. There's charter schools that pursue a particular educational model like Montessori or Waldorf. And there's other charters that look, feel, operate much like traditional public schools. While most charters are non-union, some charters are staffed by teachers who collectively bargain. There are charter schools that operate a single school, and then there's charter management organizations that operate networks of schools. Some now have more students in their network than many districts in California. There's some charters that I personally believe, should be shut down due to low performance or corruption. There's other charters that I believe should expand because of their effectiveness, particularly in serving our most vulnerable and student populations. So you can see why when I'm asked, and I often am, what do you think of charter schools? I can't answer the question with a simple answer. In my experience, it's impossible to lump all charters into one group. There are, however, key questions, that I think one must ask to determine the value of charter schools. So the first question one must ask is, which students do charter schools serve? And perhaps most importantly, are the students in charter schools representative of the community in which they operate? Having a better understanding of the demographics will lead to a much more substantive conversation and debate about the value of charter schools in particular communities. Locally, the demographics of charter schools within MPUSD, with one exception of Learning for Life, demonstrate that charter schools are not representative of the community. So let me back up that statement with some slides. So this is the percentage of students who qualify for free or reduced lunch. This is taken from the State Department of Education. So this is data publicly available. MPUSD has around 68% of their students who qualify as low-income students, right? Qualify for free or reduced lunch. Learning for Life, which is a charter we authorize, it's an independent study charter that focuses on kids who have dropped out or are going to drop out and are looking for a different environment. They have around 49%. Bayview Academy 38, ISM 26, Monterey Bay Charter 23, and Big Sur Charter 20. So you can see the very different in that category. If you look at percentage of students who are homeless, we have 9% of our students are considered homeless. This doesn't mean they're sleeping on the street. This means that they qualify under the McKinney-Vento Act, which is meaning when they have 2 to 3 families per home, like many of our families do, they're considered homeless under the McKinney-Vento Act. So we have 9% of our students, that's over 900 kids in our district that are homeless. Learning for Life, again, focused on kids who have had difficult in the traditional system, 7. Bayview has 0 homeless students. ISM has 0 homeless students. Monterey Bay Charter, less than 1%. Big Sur Charter, less than 1%. So in the category of homeless students, the charters do not represent the district at large. English language learners. Many of our students aren't growing up speaking English. They got to learn English in school. MPUSD has about 27% of our students are English language learners, right? So 1 in 4 students, over 1 in 4 students are learning English. They don't speak English at home. You can see the rest of the charters. 13%, 13, 8%, 4%, 3%. Not serving the same student demographic. Students with disabilities. This one is I want to get into a little bit because you'll see that the numbers are closer. So we have 10% or almost 11%. Learning for Life is a lot higher. Bayview is 10%. ISM 2.8%. Monterey Bay Charter, you can see. But within students with disabilities is one category, right? But their specific disabilities are very different. And what you'll find is, in the charter schools, they usually serve students who qualify for resource program, RSP, meaning the majority of the classes are mainstreamed, but they need a little extra help. Our student population for students with disabilities includes medically fragile students, students with severe autism, students with severe disabilities in terms of their cognitive development, students with emotional disturbance, right? So while we have a similar percentage, my argument is, and this is the case in most district charter schools, is the district, by and large, serves the more severe cases of special education, whereas the charters do, and they must qualify. If a student applies for, let's say, ISM, who is emotionally disturbed, ISM has to accept them, but they don't have a program to serve them. So then that student would then go to the district program and be served by the district. I'll stop there for a second. So as I mentioned, the district shows what's, to me, painfully clear, that charters are not serving the same students as MPUSD. To me, this is a problem. Charters should be expanding opportunities for students, particularly students who are historically disenfranchised by the traditional system. And it's clear by the data that charters within MPUSD serve a much more privileged population. So that's question number one. Who do charter schools serve? I think it's important to ask that. Second question, in analyzing charter schools, it must be, what is the impact of charters on school integration? The reality is, and this might surprise some of you, but 60 years since the historic Supreme Court Brown versus Board of Education decision, our schools are more segregated than they ever have been. And our segregated schools are not just segregated by race, but segregated by socioeconomic status. Increasingly, students who attend schools with concentrated poverty, right? So concentrated poverty means the vast majority of all the students in that single school are low income, right? It's concentrated. So students attending schools with concentrated poverty, as you can imagine, that has a staggering impact on the student opportunity and achievement. So schools with concentrated poverty are more likely to receive less resources, be staffed by inexperienced teachers, have a higher rate of principal turnover, and must confront and serve students who have experienced a great deal of trauma in their own life, whether that be hunger, housing instability, violence in the home. And there's a lot of research now on what they call adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. And what you find is the toxic stress that the brain releases when students experience trauma physiologically determines the brain development of students at a very young age. And they've been able to show that if a student has more, don't quote me on this, but I believe it's more than 4 adverse childhood experiences, right? Like has seen someone has violence in the home, hunger, etc. That's very predictive of their outcomes in school, right? And opportunities in life. So simply put, a student attending a school with concentrated poverty has the odds stacked against them. While we're likely to say in this country that all kids have a fair and equal chance to fulfill the American dream, my experience working in high poverty schools has led to the belief that for many of our students in these high poverty schools, education is not the great equalizer, and in fact serves to further disenfranchise our youth. So therefore, a question for any participant in the charter school debate must be whether the charter school serves to integrate or does it help to further segregate our schools? Data locally confirms the latter. So this is a slide of the International School of Monterey and Martin Luther King Elementary. And this is a particularly important comparison because the schools are within a stone's throw from each other. They share a field, right, in Seaside. So you can see the tremendous differences in the demographics of each school. Almost 67% English learners, less than 10%. A school of 90% poverty to a school of 26% poverty, right? These schools are literally a stone's throw apart. So what would happen if magically these two schools merged? What would the demographics look like? So this would be the merged 800 student, right? You would not have concentrated poverty. You would not have over 50% English language learners. You'd have the smaller percentage of homeless students and smaller percentage of students with disabilities. And you could do this for Bayview. You could do this for Monterey Bay Charter. You'd see the same thing. But this was an example because they're so close to each other. So that's question number 2. Does charter schools serve to integrate our schools, or do they serve to further segregate our schools largely by race and class? A final question one must ask is a more fundamental question. What is the purpose of education in the United States, and what are the key levers to achieve that purpose? I realize purpose of education is a large philosophical question. You could read about Aristotle, Plato, etc. But I'll provide the following. Public education in the United States emerged in part from the goals around a democratic society. To prepare people to become responsible citizens, to improve social conditions, to promote cultural unity, to help people become economically self-sufficient, and to enhance individual happiness and enrich individual lives. It was in spirit of these goals that public schools were widely established in the late 1800s. And although the quality and inclusiveness of such schools has varied over time since their creation, public schools originated as a necessary expression of a democratic society. So at a time when 1 in 5 Americans under 18 lives in poverty, the gap between educational haves and have-nots is widening, not closing, and our government institutions are fundamentally threatened. The best hope for a democracy is publicly supported schools that offer equitable opportunities for all students, regardless of the zip code in which they live. So that leads to the question of whether charter schools offer a systemic improvement of equal opportunities, not just for some students, but for all students. And for those who argue that charter schools can lead to systemic improvement at scale, I would simply ask to show me a state or a country that has pursued that choice-based approach and found success. You won't find it. And I had the opportunity to sit with a lot of international leaders in education while at Harvard, and a guy from Canada. I find Canadians to be extremely reasonable. So just raised the question to the person kind of pushing this choice model, choice-based reform, and saying, does it bother you that no high-performing country has followed that path to be high-performing? And the American said, no, it doesn't bother me. So he said, well, then we're having an ideological debate. We're not having a debate based on the facts on the ground. Because the reality is that a choice-based system is not the primary lever for improvement. If we're concerned with fulfilling the purpose of education, as I have described, democratic citizens with the knowledge and skills to tackle social problems, to promote cultural unity, in addition to self-sufficiency, we must look beyond the current charter versus public debate towards larger systemic changes that can produce the types of large-scale reform needed for a more just and equitable system for all our kids, not some of our kids. So my hope is that outlining these essential questions: do charter schools reflect the community in which they operate? Do charter schools increase segregation with schools, particularly with concentrated poverty? And are charter schools the right level for broad systemic reform? Can help further the dialogue as we talk about charter schools and lead to a more substantive conversation. So with that, I look forward to the conversation. Thank you very much.
Those are very compelling criteria. But public schools are failing to provide certain academic, meet certain academic requirements, while charter schools are meeting those. And I use, for example, music programs. On the Monterey Peninsula, most of the charter schools provide outstanding music programs, in contrast to many of the public schools. Could you just address how do we achieve academic achievement within the criteria you outlined?
Sure, that's a great question. So first, I just want to clarify around music. So when I got to Monterey Peninsula, we had 2 music teachers for our 12 elementary schools. Now we have 7 music teachers. Every student is engaged in music at least weekly in all our elementary schools. And these are credentialed music teachers with great knowledge. So I would invite you to come to some shows to see that music is alive and well in our schools. But with that said, I think that you're absolutely right that the system of public schools was not designed for every kid to be successful. It was largely a sorting mechanism where some kids were successful and some kids are not. So to me, the question is, how do you reform that system? And is that system best reformed by removing some kids from the system to get a different education? Or is it best reformed to do things like Finland and Singapore and others, where they've invested heavily in paying teachers a lot more, higher bar for entry into the teaching profession, much more social and emotional supports at the school site level, and a society with a strong safety net. To me, those would be the things that I would want to do. But finally, on test scores, there's a few things. One is standardized test scores largely predicts the socioeconomic conditions of students, right? So if there's a wealthy student, they're likely to have a good test score, irregardless of the educational teaching and learning that they had. They will score well. If they're a poor student, they will likely not score well, right? So they're very predictive in that. So the question to me is, rather than look at the end result and say some schools are good, some schools are bad based on that, is are we moving students from where they start? How far are they moving, right? If you have a 5th grader who comes in at 1st grade reading level and leaves your classroom at 3rd grade reading level, to me that's heroic. The score that you'll see on the state thing says did not meet proficient, right? And you may draw a conclusion that that is a quote-unquote bad school, when in fact it is progressing much more than a quote-unquote good school. And there is research to show that. It was in the New York Times a few years ago that showed the districts that are improving student outcomes based on what they're predicted to score, based on lots of predictive data, and what they actually score. And well, I won't. I was gonna talk about. Yeah, I won't do that. Okay. So there was. We were not one of those that was a huge. We were predicted to do better, but not as good as some others. But there were some districts that in our county that you would say is a high-performing district by that standard was not high-performing?
It's a question.
Yes.
The resource is being taken by the charter schools. If that resource, the money allocation, were put into the public school, would that help? Because by definition, at the time when we establish charter schools, it means to be different, to be specialized, to deal with a different segment. So the standard of applying to say that you are not serving the whole community, we couldn't really answer that because by definition, charter school, I don't know if the charter has said you have to serve the total population. They are cherry picking the students. And therefore, just like in the university system, you got Stanford, you got Harvard, you got different schools, they found themselves. So I would suggest that we go for charter schools paying for themselves.
So covered a lot of ground there. So one I would say is that yes, resources do leave the system because in California, it's average daily attendance determines your funding, right? So your enrollment goes down, you lose funding, and there is an impact of that. Charters are an open lottery system, right? So they are, technically open to all kids, but you saw in the data that the outcomes of that tend to be parents that are more involved, that have more resources, that know how to navigate the system and get their child in. Secondly, a lot of charters have conditions where if you're a board member, your kid gets in. If you're a teacher, your kid gets in. If you have a sibling, your siblings get in, right? Makes sense. I'm not saying that any of those are necessarily bad, but it's a system that is designed to reproduce its current demographics, right? So we can say, oh, it's open to everyone, anyone can apply. But A, if you have a design that way, it's going to limit the number of spots that are truly open. And then B, you hear charter schools advertising on National Public Radio in the morning. I hear it, all the time. Who listens to National Public Radio, right? It is not the Latina houseworker has living 4 families to a home that's working three jobs. Like, that's not your NPR listener, right? So who are you advertising to when you say it's open to all? You are procuring a certain demographic, right? In terms of resources, to me, it's less resource and more about integrated schools, right? If you have a 90% school of concentrated poverty, you are dealing with, and believe me, because I have, lots and lots of challenges of kids coming with lots and lots of trauma, right? Our schools should be, in my view, 50-50 schools, right? We should have a mix of races, a mix of socioeconomic status, a mix of English language learners, and all kids, I would argue, would benefit from that, right? Not just the low-income kids. But the reality is, in our multicultural America, in the future, you will have to be able to navigate a very, very complex and different world than just your little segment, right? And so my kids, they attend my schools in MPUSD. And I will say, from a parent perspective, there's a lot to improve. I'm like, who's in charge of that? Well, yeah, actually, I am. So it's not a fun conversation. But I will say they are expanding their exposure and ability to navigate in a way that is going to help them in life forever. And we are very privileged. So, I mean, we read to our kids every night. They didn't experience trauma. Like, they are going to be fine academically, right? And this is going to help them in other ways. We will see. We have a running joke, my wife and I, whether our daughter in particular will come back and say, thanks for doing that, right? That really helped. Or like, what were you guys thinking? You know, like, that wasn't cool. This is my life, you know? So we'll see. We're hoping for the former.
Hi. Disclaimer, I am on the board of the international school, and I'm also a parent of a kindergartner at the international school. And so I just wanted to clarify a few things. And one was that I really feel like your presentation would be more accurate if you included the population breakdown and the demographics of the community as opposed to just the schools. So looking at the community as a whole, in terms of what's the population of McKinley-Bento, what's the population of socioeconomic diversity and things like that, because I do feel like that would actually give a better representation of what the charter schools are doing in terms of having a diversity at the schools. So just one is that having the school, not just the district.
Of Seaside or the whole district?
Seaside, Marina, Monterey.
So counting all the old folks who are retired as part of it?
Yeah.
To
I mean,
me, that's not, to me, I disagree. It should be the students, right?
So, because what I'm trying to say too.
It should be the demographics of students.
There is a large population of people who also leave to go to private schools. So I'm just saying, I think that the problem is more complicated and more in depth than just sort of charters good, charters bad, or public schools or neighborhood
Don't disagree.
good.
Absolutely. That's what I hope tried
Right.
to say at the end. You know, this is a large systemic problem. The question is, how do you get after it?
Right, because there is a huge population of folks who leave to go to private schools or who move to different school districts in order to support their kids.
Mm-hmm.
And also there's people who go to charter schools who are really great supporters and fans of public schools. So I think it's a little more nuanced. And I was happy that you talked about the lottery, because the lottery to get in is an open lottery where, at least at the international school, doesn't do NPR, but is looking at how to target and do more marketing to underserved communities that they have, and they have a preference for MPUSD. Also, and again, I think it's not about, for me, it's sort of like, what's the real root of the problem here? And is the real root of the problem the 10-member board where, like, of 10 members of the board where they do put their blood, sweat, and tears into the school, and then their kids get into the school, or that, and not even all of the school board, the board of directors have kids. So it's looking at that as a doesn't seem like a big issue when you look at the bigger problem of education and the fact that most of these students would have gone into the public schools if they felt comfortable, if they felt, I mean, just joking that you and your wife are having that is like the heart of where my gut has been for 5 years, having a child and saying, what am I going to do? My local school does not feel like it's serving or supporting me in the way that I wish my son would be supported.
Did you send him to the local school?
No, so my son goes to the international school.
Right. So you're making an assumption that the school wouldn't have been able to serve your son correctly.
I did my research in terms of what were the outcomes and what would I feel comfortable
on the data,
with.
right, which is largely predictive on test scores, largely predicted by socioeconomic status.
Yeah, but I still feel like
Did you tour the school?
I did. I live
You
right
did?
across the street from the school.
You
I actually
yeah.
fund a lot of things
Yeah.
with MPUSD. So I'm
Yeah.
looking at what can we do in order to, as a community, come together, as opposed to assigning that any one particular, like, charter school is good or charter school is bad, but how can we come together and look at the real problem as opposed to some small parts of a wider issue? Because I think people are leaving to go to private schools, to go to different communities.
Sure.
And not just the charter school conversation, which
So-
have people who are trying to get out there and serve better. You could also look at the trends of the demographics within the charter school community and see a big difference in how it's moving forward. So I just think it's a little deeper and more complex.
My goal was to do just that and say it is deeper and more complex, right? As I mentioned in the beginning, there's charter schools that I think should be a lot more. We should expand them, right? And there's charter schools that I think are, bad and should be shut down, right? So to me, the answer is definitely beyond the charter versus non-charter. But the demographics do not lie, right? That's not my opinion. That's the reality of the demographics, right? And it is what it is, you know, and people can say whatever they want, but that's the demographics. And my question is the same as yours, is how do we improve the system? And to me, taking a largely educated, more privileged population and removing it from the public schools does not help improve the public schools. With that said, I totally understand as a parent, you got to make the decision that you got to make, and I respect that, you know, and I wouldn't ever send my kid to a school which I didn't think was going to, if I thought it was going to harm them or whatnot. The only question I would have is for parents is, how do you make that determination, right? Did you visit the school? Did you talk to the principal? Did you, you know, spend time trying to understand what's going on? Or did you look at a test score and say, that's a 1 on the great schools, and that school's not for my kid, right? That's a very different thing. Sorry, one more thing. We'll say International School Monterey came out, supported our bond, knocked on doors, volunteered, were tremendous help. So I don't want to say anything bad about the people in ISM. They did a great service and continue to be supportive of our schools.
I'm a retired special education teacher. I taught special day class for 30 years. And I know you mentioned that children that need support services get resource. But I also know from experience that that can be fluid. There can be children who are in resource that it turns out need more than that. So what happens to those kids that, if there were special day class available, would get it?
As you know, you would convene an IEP meeting, right, and look for the least restrictive environment. And so if it was determined that the RSP program was not meeting the students' need and they needed a more restrictive special day class, then, because the charters largely do not have that, they do not have special day classes, the student would then go to a MPUSD school that had special day classes. So that's what it would be, but it would be through the IEP process, which would be a team decision. Well, if it was determined that they needed services that were not offered at the school, then they would, by law, you have to offer them those services, and the charter would be responsible for that. And we are the charter for ISM. We are the partner in special education and so they would come to our schools, or you could work out other ways, but ultimately it's based on the IEP decision.
It seems to me we know pretty well what it takes to provide good education. Mm-hmm. There's not a whole lot of mystery. Still a lot we don't know about psychology of learning, but we know the main things. You mentioned Finland raising the salary and prestige of teaching. Mm-hmm. That alone would make a big difference. Mm-hmm. But how are we going to get those resources? We certainly haven't shown in the past mm-hmm. that we're very good in assigning resources to education.
Yeah, well, thanks for that, because I'll be able to plug the League of Women Voters is supporting a School and Community First Act that is people are trying to get signatures to qualify for the November 2020 ballot. If that qualifies, what it is, it's essentially a split roll property tax. So it's saying Prop 13 for homeowners stays intact, not touched. We know everyone loves it, you know. But for corporations that started in the 60s or 70s and are paying 1970s taxes on now Silicon Valley Central offices, they will have to be reassessed, and that reassessment would have to happen every 3 years, and that would bring about $5 billion into the public school system, which would be, great. But the other thing that it would do that is really beneficial is right now, because property taxes are low, the state has to rely on capital gains and income tax to fund schools. Well, that's, as you know, very cyclical. When times are good, you get more money. When times are bad, you don't. So it's hard to build a program, right, with every 7 years, you're going to hit a recession. And so every 7 years, you're going to have to cut the things that you just spent 7 years building back up. So it should offer some stability to the system that I think funding system that's needed.
Thank you very much. By the way, big fan of you, PK. I've got 2 sons. At some stages, they were rascals. So we've been in private schools. We've been in MPUSD. We've also been in charter schools. And what I have learned from that, being in each of the schools, and it really delved into the funding and the disparity of the funding between Carmel, PG, MPUSD, and charter schools. And now that I'm a treasurer of a charter school, I'm finding that the charter school actually has less funding per kid than MPUSD, even though we're in that same system, don't get the benefits of the bonds, in direct benefits anyway. So, the funding, really, I hope that the community will come together and look that, if, Carmel's getting $22,000 per kid, and MPUS, what's the funding
Around
per kid?
$10,000.
Around $10,000. See, we're funding off of, $8,000, $9,000 per kid. And so I think that's what you mentioned about the funding is the core of the issue, and everybody has to come together. So whether that's older people that need maybe a little higher property taxes, maybe it's coming from bonds, maybe it's the state looking at it differently. So that, because what I found is for my kid, one of my kids thrives in the MPUSD system. And one of my kids thrives in a charter system, and they bring different things to the table for each kid. And I laud PK for reminding everyone that the MPUSD system has some tremendous school. We love the MPUSD school that my older son is in, and I just thank you for what you've done for the system. It just keeps getting better and better.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
My question goes more to the decision structure to allow different organizations or structure in the state system that allows the creation of charter schools. It seems to me it's varied. I think you mentioned 3, maybe even 4 ways that a charter could be created or approved. And then what's the monitoring responsibility of those approving agencies? It seems to me it's a real scattergun approach, and it looks like that's one of the problems.
And some of the legislation tried to create more clarity around that. But districts approve charters, right? And if a district denies a charter, they can appeal to the county. And then the county board could approve that charter. And that's happened for a few of the charters in our district. The county, then it used to be, and I think this is changing a little bit, but if they denied at the county, they can appeal to the State Board of Education, and the state can authorize them. So there's really 3 levels. The second 2 levels are more on appeal. But the bar of to start a new charter is much higher than it is to renew an existing charter. So to start a new charter, there's a number of things conditions they have to meet, and the new law came in, and it's going to start, and it will have a big impact, saying that districts, particularly districts in financial distress, can use as one criteria the financial impact the charter will have on the district. That's new. Used to be you could not do that. So that will change things. But in terms of renewing a charter, if the charter shows progress on academic progress, that they should get it's much more likely that they would be renewed on those grounds alone.
What about the monitoring responsibility of approved?
Yeah. So The approval agencies are to monitor their charters, and really for, not to get in the weeds of the day-to-day, but monitoring the finances, monitoring some compliance issues. There's a number of different things that you're supposed to monitor, and you do get to charge a small fee to help you offset the costs of monitoring.
I would like you to address the increasing disparity, the segregation in public schools with housing availability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really good question. So it was interesting. I was reading this one guy saying, Bill Gates gives a lot of money to education in his foundation, and this guy was making the argument that if he really wants to solve education, he needs to solve housing, and that money would be better spent in integrating cities and integrating the places where people live. So I think that's a huge issue because of the way the system evolved. You go to the school where you live determines the school that you are bounded to go to, and that obviously has a huge impact. Wealthier areas have, by and large, more resources, wealthier schools, low-income areas, low-income schools. So yes, I think that there would have to be a real effort to integrate our communities. But, that's a tough challenge, right? I mean, it's hard. You see the debates going on about lots of different things. And I think, people are trying to put having people be able to park in a parking lot, and that's a problem for a lot of people. So it's a tough challenge. But I definitely think that it is, as long as we have ultra-segregated cities and towns, you will have ultra-segregated schools. They go hand in hand.
I speak as a parent who experienced public school, private school, charter school, and homeschool, all in one kid. Mainly, we were just looking at all the different educational opportunities. I was fascinated with your idea of merging the international school and the Martin Luther King.
So just want to interrupt.
School.
Sorry, that wasn't. That was for discussion purposes. It wasn't a proposal. It was just to say.
I understand that. For
Yeah,
discussion
okay.
purposes.
All right. Yeah.
You would bring back the kids. Well, first of all, I believe the international school doesn't just draw from Seaside.
Mm-hmm.
People from
They're
all
open.
over the community send their kids to that school
Yeah.
for what it offers.
Right.
But theoretically, if you were to bring back the charter school kids, a lot of whom are more accomplished, as you say, coming from higher income families, into the one public school, this supposed blend of Seaside, Martin Luther King, and the international school. The question is, I believe tracking is no longer permitted or acceptable in public school. When I was in public school, it was a large public school, everyone went to public school, and the classes that you were in there were advanced classes for kids that were college bound and needed a certain level, and that was called tracking.
Right.
So you put all these kids together. The parents of the kids that go to charter schools are looking for those advanced classes, so to speak. So what does the public school do now if it can't track? How do you take care of all those different levels in one school?
Really good question. So we do have some advanced classes, right? So that's, around math, for example, if a kid, like my son is in 7th grade, he's taking 8th grade math, for example. So that does exist. But really it's around the differentiation from our teachers to provide the level of support needed for every particular child. And that's really hard when you have a range of, 4th graders, some at 8th grade level and some at 1st grade level, to be able to do. So we've focused a lot on building the capacity of our educators to give them the tools to be able to differentiate. But it is a huge challenge, and I have a ton of respect for teachers in general. No disrespect to all the teachers who are here, but it's different now than I think it was, 20, 25 years ago. And it's really challenging. But yes, that would be part of the challenge to do. But we've been able to show, at many of our schools that it's been successful, and we're seeing kids at the top continue to progress and kids from the bottom continue to move up. So I would say it is possible, although challenging.
You worked as a principal, yes, in the high school where you were able to make a big change in the kids' performance. But it was the same school, and you had sort of the same staff and the same financial situation during the years that you were there, right? So what things did you do, or one or two things did you do, that were able to make that transformation?
So it was a charter school, and it went into a failing public school, and it was a turnaround model. So basically, an entirely new staff, entirely new leadership team. What we did was we extended the school day. So school went to 5 o'clock instead of getting out at 3. So we were able to add the tutoring and the after-school supports and that type of thing. And we attracted folks who were like all in. Like I adopted kids from my school, right? And we were just, it was not sustainable, I will tell you that. But we were working so hard, and we're all mission driven and dedicated. And at a high poverty school, that's really what it takes. But we did have some flexibility to extend the school day. We went to school uniforms, so that helped a lot. We held a high bar for expectations and behavioral expectations. At our school, when we got there was a thing called Freshman Friday where you dump a freshman in the trash can on Fridays, and that was like an accepted thing, So we put an end to that, and we had like students and parents be like, well, it happened to my kid. Why can't it was like that mentality, right? So we had to really change that. And I will say, as a charter school, we were able to say, this is the expectation, right? This is it. And we would give kids 2, 3, 4 chances. We really worked with the kids. But we also were able to say, I'm sorry, it was never for grades, but for behavior, we were able to say, you're not meeting the behavioral expectations. This is a school of choice. You are choosing to come here. You are not choosing to do the expectations, and there are other schools for you if you choose not to do the expectations. Public schools can't do that, right? They got to serve all kids, so it's different. Well, yes, technically they cannot, but there's a lot of counseling out that goes in. I'm not saying these schools here, but I know for a fact there's a lot of counseling out that goes in charter schools. And it's by and large not around academics or not giving second, third chances and stuff like that. But there is saying this is the expectation. And that's true.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Please keep in mind that in December, we will be off. Take the month off and be back in January with another luncheon meeting. Thank you.
Yes, you can